Hey guys, welcome to PB Garage, where today we're going to be swapping out some crusty old suspension on this Rabbit for some brand new Koni orange struts with Eibach lowering springs. Stick around. So let's just launch right in here. We're going to start with the back axle. So obviously first we're going to pull the wheel off. My car was pretty rusty, so I decided to get in there with some WD-40 and spray everything before I started taking bolts out. Once that was done, I got in with the jack, supported the lower control arm, and then I'm going to pull the bolt off the bottom of the wheel hub assembly there. Now I probably should have put a little bit more weight on the jack so it wouldn't pop up like that, but learning for next time. Now I can pull the jack out and remove the spring. So there's that rear spring. You can see it was broken at the bottom there. So next up, to get that shock out, I removed the two bolts holding the upper shock mount. And then got in and removed the bolt holding the bottom of the shock. And with that bolt out, it was easy to remove the shock completely.
Okay, so here we've got the new spring compared to the original one. You can see the difference in height, and I'm just going to transfer this rubber over to this spring and come over here. And you can see, maybe, you can see there's the bottom of the coil just sitting there. So I got to fish that guy out and then set the new spring in on that perch.
So just pulling that piece of spring out, you can see it there. And now I'm swapping the rubber bushing onto the new spring and throw that guy into the perch.
So just a little something interesting. If you look down there, you can see on the left there's a little tab holding the last coil down, and then there's a little chunk of the rubber sticking out there. So basically what I did was slip the end of the spring under the tab on the left and then rotate the spring until it touches the stop on the right hand side there. And that way I know that the spring is sitting in the perch properly. And then I'm just going to line up the top with our little locating pin on the body here. So that rubber into that as I bring that control arm up with the jack.
Once that was all done, I could swap over to the shock and get it ready to be reinstalled. So we'll just pull that nut off the top and then remove that whole upper shock mount. And that piece was in good enough condition I was able to reuse it, so I just threw it straight onto the Koni shock there. Now the instructions for the struts and shocks say not to use impact tools when tightening those bolts, so I would recommend that you definitely don't use an impact to tighten that bolt. And then we're just going to throw our dust cap back on, give everything a wipe, and then send it into the car. Now to get the lower control arm lined up again, I'm just jacking everything up right there. And then once that hole lines up, I actually had to use a drift to get it totally lined up so I could slip that bolt in.
Okay, so what I've done is I've come up here, I've tightened these guys. These are torqued down because that won't matter for the, there's no moving part here. But what I've done is down here, I've put this bolt in, it's in but not totally tight. You can see the washer moves there. And this guy's not totally torqued down as well. And I'm gonna wait until the car's sitting back on its four wheels so that it's resting at the proper height before I tighten those up. And another thing I'm going to do is just loosen off. So this bolt here, where the control arm meets the frame, I'm gonna loosen that guy off just a little bit once the car is down on all four wheels, and kind of turn the bolt a little bit just to make sure that that bushing kind of recenters itself, because this control arm now with the lowering springs, it's going to be sitting, resting, like spending its whole life a little bit higher up than it was before. And if I don't loosen off that bolt and let that bushing kind of recenter itself, I'm probably going to tear up that bushing too quickly. So that's all there is to do for here. So I'm going to repeat the same process, everything on the other side, and then set the car down on all four wheels and tighten those bolts up.
Once the whole rear end of the car was done, we went ahead and started on the front. So just remove the wheel, clean all the loose rust off, and trust me, there was a lot of it. Pull out a chunk of extra spring that's not needed anymore. Beauty. 3 out of the 4 on this car were totally shredded. So here I'm just loosening up my connections for the brake hose and the ABS sensor so I could get them out of the way. Zipping off the nut for my sway bar end link. And then jacking the lower control arm up a little bit just to relieve the tension on that sway bar end link and get it out. I like leaving the tension on when I'm pulling the nut out because it keeps the bolt from spinning. But as soon as you got the nut off, jack it up, pull that end link out. And then to remove the bolt holding the strut, I'm using an M14 triple square. You can see that bolt's in really rough condition. That's one I have to replace. Now here's a special tool I made using a fatter Allen key, and I ground down 2 sides of it so I could slip it into the back of the strut mount there where it meets the hub, and just set it into the groove there and then rotate it around to spread. Okay, so I'm gonna save you guys the effort of watching me struggle against this thing. I've got my strut off, as you can see, you know, busted spring, both the top and the bottom, like we kind of already suspected. And then to get this off, you'll notice I have the whole assembly here with me. I still got my tool wedged in here. Basically what ended up happening, so you know, you guys saw me zip the sway bar end link off. I removed the caliper, removed the rotor, removed the dust shield so it wouldn't get mangled. I also unplugged the ABS sensor and popped the tie rod end out of this and found that I need to replace the tie rod end as well, so that's fun. But the main struggle was getting this strut bearing off. So, you know, it seems simple enough. Like, wiper arms off so you can get that cowl out, get those 3 bolts up here. Now I have done a couple of cars in the junkyard and those bolts came out real easy. But of course on my cheap car here, no such luck. So 1 bolt came out real easy, just spun right out. The other 2 broke the captive nuts on the underside of that sort of pillow block there or whatever it is. So I don't know if you guys can see, this guy here is just totally loose. It's just floating in there. But anyways, so that meant that the bolts were hung up there and just spinning the nut underneath. Now I couldn't get at those to try and hold them or anything with the strut in place. So what I ended up doing was getting on into the top little hole there with a 21 mil socket and spin that nut off the top of the strut. And then that allowed me to remove the strut from the car and get under there with a grinder, you know, notch those 2 nuts that were broken loose and get them to let go of the bolt so I could get the bolt out, pull this out. A lot of fun, a lot of fun. But we can see that this bearing was totally mangled. It's all shredded, so I mean, obviously all this needed to be replaced. If you guys know an easier way than what I just attempted when you have broken captive nuts, please let me know. But that was kind of the route I ended up taking. So now I'm gonna throw that hub assembly, knuckle, whatever you want to call it, into the press my strut out because I can't get it to budge at all, even with the tool, spreading that knuckle apart a little bit. And then I'll be able to get in there and clean the bore, throw my new strut in, and assemble everything back together. So here we're just showing you guys the part numbers that I used, assembling our little strut bumper there with the dust boot, just putting that big edge in. And then I figured I would be able to assemble everything by hand just because with the lowering spring there should be little to no preload on that whole assembly. So I should be able to just put it right together. So we got our washer on there, and then we're going to put our spring onto the whole assembly, followed by the strut bearing and pillow mount there. Now here I ran into a little bit of an issue, couldn't get the nut on for some reason. So I thought I could put it on by hand with the lowering spring because it wasn't under preload. And I thought that because when I put the mount and the bearing on without the bumper, everything went together okay and I was able to put the nut on the top. But as soon as I put the bumper on, like you guys saw, I couldn't get the nut to reach the thread on this guy. So I got to looking old parts versus new, and the only difference I could find was the bumper on the old setup
has like a hole the size of the shaft all the way through, and the new bumper has a smaller diameter hole at the top, even though it's larger, and that might be tough to see, but even though it's larger in the first part of the bumper, it necks down right here at the top, and I'm not really sure why that is. So I think all I'm gonna have to do is just trim that hole out to make sure that this slides all the way down onto the shaft.
So I ended up using a little drill bit there just to open up that hole enough to get the whole diameter of the shaft through it. And that's the way it should sit. Then it was easy to put the washer on the strut mount with the bearing and get everything assembled properly. And you can see now it's real easy to get that nut on the top. And once again, you're not supposed to use an impact to drive that on, so I would recommend you definitely don't. But here, back with our thing, a little bit of grease on there, slip that strut right in, nice. Remove our tool, which lets it clamp down on the strut. You can see it's already quite solid, even though I don't have the bolt in yet. But we're gonna set that aside and then put this guy back in the car. Now, one interesting thing about putting that into the car is we have this top strut mount that's directional. So if you have a look at the strut mount here, you can see the arrows that need to face forward and back on the car, which means it can only go in one orientation, which is this one right here. And obviously on the opposite side of the car, it will be flipped or mirrored, which is exactly where we're headed. We're gonna take off the other side and put our assembled strut right back in that one's place. Then we just have to button up all of our pieces and we're in business. We get to go take the car for a spin with the new suspension. And there she is, sitting pretty. Not too low, but still a significant lowering over stock. Because of all the broken springs though, it's sitting about the same way it was when I bought it. All right, let's talk about driving impressions a little bit. I've got about 6,000 kilometers on this setup now. And initially when I first started driving the car, I felt like the ride quality was a little bit harsh. Now that everything's broken in, it's gotten better. I felt like initially the struts were maybe under damped. So what was happening, you hit sort of a sharp bump and you'd get like 2-3 oscillations before the suspension would settle down, before the car would kind of smooth out again. And I didn't really like that. But now that I've been driving it, either I've gotten used to it or the suspension's just broken in. Maybe the seals in the struts are making them, have worn in a little bit and are making better contact, stuff like that. And it's a little bit smoother now. I should say it's actually quite a bit smoother than it was when I first put the suspension in. It's still not quite as smooth as what I'm maybe used to, but I think I'm comparing multi-link suspension in an A4 to this, which is like McPherson strut, not quite on the same level. But the handling is amazing. So, fast sweepers and even just the directness of the steering, everything's really tight. It's very flat going around like a fast on-ramp, something like that. And the grip level is surprisingly really high, considering I've only got 195, 65, 15s all around, like all season cheap tires, not, performance tires or anything like that. And I think dollar for dollar, this is a really good value. I'm comparing it, I had a similar setup, Koni oranges on Eibach lowering springs on a Mark 3, very similar to this. I really liked that setup. I drove that for quite a long time. And then I had an Eibach Pro Kit setup, so it would have been the same springs, but it had, I think, Bilstein dampers on a Mark 4 Golf. And that one I felt like the ride quality was a little bit better. It was a little bit better mix of comfort and still all of the performance, same kind of performance handling as this setup. So I think if I were to go again, I probably would opt for the little bit more expensive struts. I love these springs though. And for a budget build, I think it's a really good option. I'm really happy with it. So, if you guys are trying to decide what to buy and you don't quite want to get into the cost of, some of the more expensive setups, I think that this is a really good option. I didn't want to go with coilovers in my case, again, just because it's got to do winters and summers, and I didn't want to break the bank. So my only option for coilovers up here where we have road salt and stuff like that would have been a set of whatever those stainless steel ones are. What are they? FK, I think. So again, dollar for dollar, it's probably the best option. Okay. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. Interact with us. Send us messages if you have questions. We love hearing from everybody, and hopefully we'll see you guys again when you check out some more of our videos. We've got a whole playlist for this car. Videos are rolling out right now. I'm doing them every week, so keep checking that out, or check the playlist and see what's already uploaded. And yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for watching.
Oh no! I can't believe it. All that wheel hop, I think I just tore the flex pipe apart. Oh, I can hear the exhaust leak. Oh, that's terrible. Well, I guess I know what I have to do next on this car. Man, brutal.